D-Day was one of those moments where we knew what heroism was, where we understood what good versus evil looked like, where we understood the nature of sacrifice. War has certainly become more nuanced and complex. And I think a lot of people that have doubts about Joe Biden's ability to govern this great nation and to carry the mantle of the world's most powerful man have those doubts precisely because of his inability to understand tone. In a minute, you'll see Joe Biden talking about the deaths and injuries of 300,000 Russian people as if he's talking about a video game score or likes on a popular post on TikTok, though he ain't likely to reach those kind of levels. We've been looking at the metrics and it's not looking good for Joe Biden over there. Let's have a look at some of Joe Biden's clumsier moments across D-Day and then note a significant moment where he's tone deaf when it comes to the issue of war, particularly now that Russia have said that they have declared the United States an enemy for the first time actually in history. So perhaps we're in a historic moment now. Let's have a look at Joe Biden arriving in Normandy. From a body language perspective, that was clumsy. We needed a little bit more motion there. It seems ridiculous, doesn't it? Every time you see propaganda saying, he's sharper than ever, he's fast as a whip, he's lightning fast, you should see him in the sack. This guy's pelvis is like a pneumatic drill. People are going to a ridiculous length to say that Joe Biden is some sort of priapic force, some incredible overlord that should be governing the world naked. But it seems to me that when you see him in public, he looks like he's in considerable trouble. There's a moment here where he turns around too early. I'm not seeing this yet. Let me have a look. I'm sick of honoring these guys. I'm going to honor something over there. Like, he's confused Macron there. If you're French, that's more worrying than if you're American, because Macron's like, oh, maybe we should be honouring something in this direction. And that dear old Jill, she's spent her whole life spinning around for that fella. I'd say amp him up a little more for this ceremony.
So that was from earlier, and this is live now.
Oh dear, that's unfortunate, but we're not here just to ridicule and laugh at Joe Biden, one of our fellow human beings, on a graceful trip through the limitless here with us on Earth temporarily in human form before returning, I pray, to the ultimate divinity that connects us all. No, although let's have a look at that bit where he did appear to defecate, and then we'll look at his lack of nuance and diplomacy when discussing the tragic death of hundreds of thousands of Russians, neglecting to mention the deaths of Ukrainians, and not properly owning the policy decisions that are making it more and more likely that people from your country and my country will also have to lay down their life for a war that at this point is still preventable. First, though, this.
Distinguished guests, please welcome the Honorable Lloyd J. Austin III.
Lloyd J. Austin's creating a lot of tension, isn't it? Please welcome Lloyd J. Austin. Is that Joe Biden's code word for his poop? Okay, Joe, come to the bathroom. Lloyd J. Austin's about to visit. Oh, God. No, that was so inconvenient. But then look, aside from this ludicrousness is I would say, the catastrophic mishandling and clumsiness when it comes to the fact that we are in a war now, albeit still to some degree a proxy war with Russia, that Russia have declared the United States an enemy, and hundreds of thousands of people are dying right now, you might argue, unnecessarily.
They've inflicted on the Russian aggressors, they've suffered tremendous losses, Russia. The numbers are staggering. 350,000 Russian troops dead or wounded.
It's not a Black Friday sale. It's the tragic statistic of lives lost. Ukrainian lives lost. Russian lives lost. Money made. Men and women in Congress owning stocks and shares in companies like Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and Boeing. I'd hope they make better weapons than they do fuselages, because those things can't seem to get more than 100 yards without going up in flames. I'm swimming home. I'm swimming home from Florida. I'm telling you that now. It's the kind of tone-deaf, calamitous jingoism that makes you realize that there's a requirement for nuance, that there's a requirement for a different type of diplomacy, that claiming that voting for Donald Trump is a catastrophic, hysterical, and ridiculous act shows you how out of step the legacy media and the governing class are about what's happening in your country and increasingly across the world. We can't continue to bring you this awakening and hopefully enjoyable content without the support of our partners. That's why I've got to ask you, and I'm glad to ask you, are you struggling with back taxes or unfiled returns? The IRS is escalating collections, adding, get this, 20,000 new agents and sending over 5 million collection letters to kick off 2024 to spend on things that you probably don't agree with, like wars and measures and a total lack of infrastructure. In these challenging times, your best defense is Tax Network USA. Don't let the IRS take advantage of you. With over 14 years of experience, Tax Network USA have saved their clients over $1 billion in back taxes. No matter the size of your tax issue, their expertise is your advantage. They specialize in negotiating with the IRS, aiming to significantly reduce your debt. Tax Network USA doesn't just negotiate, they also protect your assets from IRS seizures and manage your yearly returns for ongoing compliance. Importantly, they are licensed to help you with all state tax issues, regardless of where you live in the United States. The clock is ticking. Don't wait as the IRS steps up its game. Seize control of your financial future now. Contact Tax Network USA for immediate relief and expert guidance. Call 1-800-245-6000 or visit taxnetworkusa.com/brand. Don't let tax issues overpower you. Turn to Tax Network USA and find your path to financial peace of mind. All right, let's get back to this content. Biden celebrated the deaths of Russian soldiers in Ukraine during a speech in Normandy commemorating the 80th anniversary of D-Day. It's a time where we're meant to be honoring those that have given their lives. It's a time when we're meant to question our own priorities, the way we live, what we live for, what a nation means, what the duty of an individual is to a nation or a tribe, what our duties are collectively and individually to God. Not to sort of jingoistically celebrate dead Russian folk. Russian officials were not invited to the D-Day commemoration, despite the Soviet Union, of course, being a significant, necessary ally of the US and France during World War II and suffering tens of millions of deaths. Perhaps they experienced more deaths and tragedy than any of us. It's astonishing, isn't it? Because the very fact that there would have been, I'm assuming, German diplomats and political leaders, even though, of course, they were our declared enemies at that time, and Russia were excluded, shows you that we're sort of participating from a macro level. We're participating in a ridiculous game. There were so many amazing lessons available in the pandemic period, and we didn't learn any of them. We're on one planet, whilst we need regional, localized government and control. Whilst we should never yield to centralized authority, we have to recognize that we have a collective duty here to one another as human beings before God. It's pretty terrifying, isn't it, to recognize that we are so out of step with basic values and principles that we are willing to allow a spectacle like took place in D-Day to pass, only really pausing to note that it appeared that the world's most powerful man defecated, stared in the wrong direction, celebrated the deaths of opponents in a war that you were allies during the conflict that he's meant to be commemorating as if he was posting about a video game score. It's a pretty tragic time. Russian officials were not invited to the D-Day commemoration, despite the Soviet Union being an ally of the US and France during World War II and suffering tens of millions of deaths. It's unlikely Ukraine has suffered more casualties since the conflict is largely an artillery war. Ukrainian forces have been significantly outgunned. Biden's speech came about a week after he gave Ukraine the green light to use US-provided missiles to strike Russian territory, a significant escalation that risks sparking World War III. Putin has warned of serious consequences for NATO countries that support strikes on Russia. French President Emmanuel Macron is preparing another major escalation of the proxy war. According to a report from Reuters, the French president is holding a meeting with Zelensky on Friday and could announce a deployment of French troops to Ukraine to train Ukrainian soldiers. We've got leaders that don't have a mandate, that are unpopular in their own countries, that don't seem to be able to get through the most basic ceremony without a toilet break, without undoing your belt, marching young people into an unnecessary war for which an agreement was on the table, which Boris Johnson, he's about 10 prime ministers back now in our country, could have had a peace deal for, or he actually actively scuppered a peace deal between Zelensky and Putin. I'm concerned. Are you concerned about the way things are going? Are you concerned that perhaps the best people for you and your family haven't got their hands on the steering wheel? It's a little concerning, isn't it? As particularly when you look at this cold, hard fact. Russia declares US as an enemy state for the first time in its diplomatic history. So during the Cuban Missile Crisis in your country, they were still like, we may be able to sort this out. During the various times, but up until dear Reagan and Gorbachev achieved a kind of peace, this is the first time that your country and Russia have officially been enemies, officially labeled an enemy for the first time, reflecting the deteriorating relations between Moscow and Washington. The Kremlin's recent change in rhetoric follows Biden's approval for Ukraine to utilize American-supplied weapons against Russian targets last week. The Biden administration stated that it worked at lightning speed to allow Kiev to use its weapons to strike particular targets within Russia. So, whether it's a tsunami of populism across Europe, seeming to suggest that people now are moving away from the establishment and moving towards the right, or whether it's seeing Joe Biden clumsily stare in the wrong direction, make misdemeanors and mishaps of a gastric nature, and celebrate the death of hundreds of thousands of Russians, perhaps inaccurately, while not, of course, recognizing the death toll upon Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian nation. It seems like it's a time when we do have to look at our institutions, that we do have to look at our leaders, that we do have to look about our assumptions. Who is governing the world if it isn't Joe Biden? And it cannot be Joe Biden, because he can't govern his way through a simple ceremony where the only requirement is to honor the heroic people that lay down their life that we may enjoy freedom, while simultaneously, in the case of Joe Biden, celebrating former allies losing lives. It seems to me that it's being handled so extraordinarily poorly that anyone who's considering voting for any of those institutional, bureaucratic, legacy politicians are the people that need to seriously examine their motivations and their evidence. But that's just what I think. Why don't you let me know what you think on the chat?
Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more uncensored content where free speech can flourish, join our live stream. Click the link right here to watch the next video if you want to, or become a member of a growing movement. Download the Rumble app and you'll be informed every time we make a new piece of content. Stay free.